My name is Angus McEwan. I'm an artist from Scotland. I've been painting since 1981. I went to college, did a couple of years of graphics, then I did 5 years of painting, doing a postgraduate year as well at university. After that, I actually worked for a couple of years working with architects and interior designers, and I did a lot of trompe-l'oeil work and a lot of work in bars and painting, all sorts of things, commissioned work. I had a gallery for a little while. I then worked in a museum for 5 years, and I looked after the exhibitions. I hung the exhibitions. I learned a lot about kind of looking after paintings and how to put shows together. I then went and did teacher training for a year, and then from there I started teaching in college. And I was teaching in college for about 23 years, 24 years. Past couple of years I've been actually working as a full-time artist, but also at the same time I've been doing online sort of tuition, and also I've become president of the Royal Scottish Society of Painters and Watercolours, and that's actually taken up a lot of time organising exhibitions and doing the sort of day-to-day running of the RSW. So it's pretty much full-time, full-on. Probably around about 2000, well actually just slightly before that. But I started using it properly around about the year 2000 when I started kind of really exploring it. Prior to that, I had picked it up and I was using it primarily to do sort of trompe-l'oeil work, which I'm not a huge fan of because I need to be in a studio and I need controlled conditions and I need time, and I can't get time. The sun moves too quickly for me to do trompe-l'oeil work. But when I went to China in 1996, I took some acrylics with me and I took some watercolors. I decided I would use watercolor because I had to do the painting. I was traveling for 3 months. So I took watercolor, took some paper, and I did quite a number of paintings. And the first few paintings were okay, but not that successful. I didn't really like them very much. I thought they were not original. They kind of looked like everyone else's painting. So what I did, just out of sheer frustration, I covered the whole painting with white gouache and I just obliterated the picture. And I was stomping around my hotel room really angry because the picture, I'd spent ages on the picture, it wasn't working, couldn't figure out a solution. And as it was starting to dry, the image started to come back through the white paint, but it was a ghostly image. And I thought, that's really interesting. So then I got some clean water and I started sort of pulling some areas out and started playing with it a little bit. It was then that I realized that actually watercolor was a versatile medium and that I didn't need to use it the way everybody else used it, that I could actually figure out my own solutions and my own ways of working. Out of that, I developed quite a lot of things, including using acrylics with watercolor around about that time. So I kind of really started to kind of slowly but surely find myself working with watercolor all the time. But it wasn't a conscious effort. I wasn't kind of like, well, I want to do watercolors now. I had already been to art school and I did four years of training in oil painting. Then I did acrylics in my postgraduate year and I never did watercolor. It wasn't about 9 years after being out of art school that I started messing around with it, really. Because I could find, it was clean, I could make mistakes and get rid of it really easily. I slowly found that I was doing it all the time without really thinking about it. Liminal spaces is really about thresholds and the sort of transition from one space to another space. So like going down a corridor or going through a doorway or a window or an archway or something like that. So I was doing that as a subject for many, many years. And it was quite interesting. I was reading about liminal spaces and I thought, oh my goodness, that's what I've been doing. I've been doing that subconsciously. There's a sort of sense of, could be something sort of lurking in the darkness. You're not sure what's going on. And I quite like playing with that. I like playing a psychological aspect of looking at a painting, especially the darker paintings. I'm trying to engage the imagination, trying to get the viewer to look at the painting and imagine they can almost see something in the darkness, but they can't quite make it out. And I quite like playing around with that concept. When I started to read about that, I started to that helped me kind of focus myself a little bit better. So although I was subconsciously doing that, it was then I realized that that's what I was doing and that I actually could refine it a little bit better. As I said, the thing that I've been doing for the past few years is exploring liminal spaces just subconsciously. The whole idea of looking at decay, I quite like going back to the same subject many years later. Recently, I went to Malta and I was looking at some of the doors that I'd seen in the past and that I had done paintings from. Most of the doors that I was, and the windows, things that I was painting were unchanged. They just were a little bit grubbier and a little bit older. And then there was another door I came across, and what they had done is that the door used to be green, and all the furnishings on the door, the locks and things like that, were all kind of faded green with rust. And when I did a painting of it, I changed the green to blue because I didn't like the green. When I went back there, suddenly the door was red, except the furnishings, which stayed green. Suddenly there was a kind of, you were playing with opposites and the colour, so I quite liked that. I thought, well, I don't need to change the green anymore. It actually then becomes useful. And it's just the surprises of coming across things like that. So as I said, the door has changed through age. The moment that when I first did the painting, although I changed it a little bit, that no longer will exist. It has gone, and so you're kind of recording it for posterity. Really, you're trying to kind of catch that moment and put it down on paper. The surface of the kind of walls and the surface of the metal and the wood and things like that are kind of using hyperrealism to really dig into the subject, to kind of honor it, as it were. So that it's not just a question of a suggestion of a door, a suggestion of a wall, or just a hint of a color. I really want to describe it properly, so that somebody could go and rebuild that door if they wanted to. They could recreate it bit by bit if they wanted to do that. So I think it's important to bring all the talents I have to bear on the subject, to kind of give it an honesty. I start off by wanting to preserve the white. So I start off fairly traditional with the painting. They're washes, thin washes. I quite often work with warm and cool colours. That's how I balance the colouring so that nothing looks too much like the colours being turned up, on a television where it becomes acidic and there's too many colours. The painting won't work if you do that. So I try to balance these strong colours by thinking about it in terms of warm and cool. As I develop the picture, I find that I might stray into areas where I start using stippling or start sort of splattering. And that's when I'm starting to really put a little bit of myself in. So when I first start off, it looks like anybody else's paintings. But as I start to develop and work into it, then I started to put my own kind of slant on the picture. It may be that as I develop it, I need to then move into maybe a little bit of printing, or I might need to sort of wash areas out. I'll kind of go with the subject and just try and figure out what the subject needs as I develop it. I do actually try to be fairly straightforward when I start off doing a painting, but it invariably ends up being less than straightforward. Well, I'm hoping that people who don't know my work will come and see the work and enjoy the work, firstly. I hope that it will kind of spread the word, as it were, so that people start to kind of recognize what I'm doing. Maybe by seeing the work up close and personal can start to kind of actually see it, because it's different to being online or seeing a photograph of it. You don't actually get a sense of the picture at all. They're usually stronger and brighter and maybe surprisingly more detailed in some ways when you see them up close. So I'm looking forward to allowing the people of Taiwan to see, to enjoy the work, and hopefully maybe even one or two might sell. So who knows? Here we are at my painting Draftsman's Desk. The subject's actually from a place I saw in Scotland. I came across it and I thought, I really quite liked the way it just set up. It was very simple. There's not very much to the painting. But what I wanted to do was convey a sense of atmosphere in the picture. When I do a painting like this, how I start off is I actually paint everything that you can't see in the dark. So all the struts and the bottom of the painting, these are all painted in. And even some areas in the walls and the sort of boardings and things there, with the knowledge that I'm actually going to get rid of them as I work. I paint these in and I slowly but surely bring them down in tone. And what I wanted to do with the front here is I wanted this to kind of come up so it goes right down. You can still see the way I painted this part of the desk, but I wanted it so that this just faded into the darkness. I built this up so that it was almost dissolving at the bottom But as it comes up here, I'm playing around with tonal contrast. And with tonal contrast, it means it pulls this edge forward. So I've got the extreme darks and lights sitting around this edge here. As it goes back, it gets very soft and dissolves in tone so that you get a sense of distance in the painting. It's called the draftsman's desk because obviously there's a T-square sitting on there with some calipers. My father was a draftsman, and it just kind of reminded me of him, so it was slightly poignant as I was doing this. And I didn't say anything to my mother. When I posted this online, she saw it. She said, you know, the first thing that came into her head was my father and the fact that he was a draftsman, and she saw the connection as well. The other thing was, it's quite easy to kind of get caught up in, this is the main part, the light source in the painting. And I wanted to keep it diffused, but at the same time, I wanted to suggest there's sort of vegetation things going on there. So I was using a lot of wet on wet, and I also played around a little bit with watercolor crayon to kind of soften that down so that it was a slightly different texture to some of the textures you're seeing in the front here. As I said before, it's really my attempt to kind of create a sense of atmosphere in the picture where some parts, including this T-square, just fades into the darkness, and some other areas just come out. Very simple painting, but something that kind of resonated with me, and plays around with the idea of liminal spaces as well, where things are in the darkness and suggested. Not everything is kind of highlighted and detailed. Some areas are actually just suggested. But this is a painting called On Wormit Beach. This is maybe a slightly different painting, one of the more sort of unusual paintings in the exhibition. What I've done here, the technique that I've used with this painting is a collage to build up a surface. In Scottish painting, we use collage a lot to, especially in acrylics and oils, to develop the surface of the painting, just to change it a little bit. So I decided to try that with watercolor, and there's quite a few different methods you can use. And the method I used with this one is that initially what I do is I build up a palette of colors through a lot of different handmade papers, and I rip them to sort of different size, but usually, 2 or 3 inches, and I will paint them with watercolors. So the little bits of paper get painted with watercolor, and I build up a huge palette of warm and cool colors. I then simplify the subject using that warm and cool palette, and I stick them down. And so they're not all the same size, they're all different sizes. Some are big, some are small. And I create a collaged impression of the image. When I saw that as a subject matter, I thought that'd actually be quite good in terms of the sort of lumpy surface of the piece of metal and the lumpy surface of the stones. If I used the collage technique to kind of describe that, it would be fitting. When you look at it, it works just like a normal painting. You're not aware of the fact that it's been collaged until you actually go up. And if you actually do go up close and spend a little bit of time looking at it, you start to become aware of some of the bits of paper. But it's only in some areas that you see that. One of the things when I build up that palette with the papers, the handmade papers, is I use a lot of different handmade papers. It's not all the kind of same sort of tissue papers or even thin watercolor papers. I use all sorts of mulberry tissues and Japanese papers and Chinese papers and all sorts of thin papers to create a nice texture. And in the end, it creates something that is quite interesting from a distance, and when you go up close to it and you kind of really get your nose right up against that glass.